I'll call the meeting to order. This is the subcommittee for the comprehensive plan of the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission. The meeting is accessible via Zoom by phone. And please see the website for details. With that, I think we go on to the order of this will be to go call in the order, public comment. We'll go to the presentation and the discussion. And so that's going to be the order of items. So with that, I'm going to actually open the floor up for public comment. Persons may speak for 3 minutes about an item that's not listed as a public hearing. And please state your name and address for the record. So would any of the, I see about 7 or 8 people here. Would anyone like to submit public comment?
We have one hand raised, Mr. Chair. Brooke Hudson, you have permission to address the subcommittee for 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, my name's Brooke. Do I also give you my address?
Just if you can tell us what neighborhood you're in, it's fine.
I live on Washington Avenue. Not entirely sure the neighborhood, but
that's fine. Thank you.
thank you so much for your time. I'll give you a brief introduction. I see my clock ticking. I am the VP of Facilities Management and Chair of Size Management and Restructuring Team for the Intercooperative Council, or the ICC of Ann Arbor. And I joined the ICC as a junior when I was at the University of Michigan, and I still live there now, even though I work full-time as an annual giving officer at U of M. So I was attracted to this meeting because I took a look at the comprehensive plan, and I just wanted to let you know that joining the ICC made it possible for me to live, work, be educated in Ann Arbor, especially when it's still so difficult to afford and find housing here. I live in an intergenerational household. I have easily accessible public transportation for my commute to campus. I don't have a car, so I commute to my office downtown, shopping centers. I have access to affordable food. We buy items wholesale and pool our resources. My friends of diverse global backgrounds and very accessibility needs. So as someone who has a lot of experience living, working, volunteering in Ann Arbor, I really feel that cooperative housing could help the city achieve the goals laid out in this plan. And I'm hoping to be a part of the conversation, maybe in a focus group, as we move towards more affordable and accessible housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other participants that would like to speak for public comment?
Brian Donovan, you have permission to address the subcommittee.
Thank you so much. My name is Brian Donovan. I actually spoke with you before with Alex Siddleman and our new board president, Brian Pagan, about the work that we do at ICC. And Brooke has now come in and replaced Alex as vice president of facilities. I'm really excited to be able to hear this presentation, that it's being made in public, that all of that is exciting, and I appreciate your work. And I really think that, the goals and the feedback from the public hearing all look like, there's appears to be a real commitment towards trying to get more people affordably living in Ann Arbor. So thank you so much for that. I don't want to add too much more. I'm really glad Brooke was able to come too. And thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak at this time?
I do not see any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
All right. All right. Thank you. And with that, I'll close this particular public comment.
I'm sorry, there was one hand that was just raised. Would you like to allow them to speak?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, we will go back. Evan, you have permission to address the subcommittee. You have permission to speak. You may need to unmute or check your audio.
Evan, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, may I begin?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a Ward 5 resident. Regarding the city's recent elimination of setback requirements for the D1 zone, the city neglected to establish setback requirements to require notification of bordering properties that a construction project intends to build up to their lot line. All neighbors should have the right to confirm that their lot line or confirm their lot lines before construction via independent surveys. Yet neighbors to a construction site are systemically disadvantaged because they aren't warned and they can't know to check the property line until after permit issuance and construction begins. More troubling, the city recently declared construction plans confidential and failed to provide exclusions for neighbors to access plans that affect them. As neighbors are excluded from the permitting process if a permit is issued to a zero setback construction project that just happens to rely on its neighbor's property for code compliance, or which causes something on its neighbor's property to become non-compliant, the neighbor's ambushed, leaving no time to object to the construction project until after construction begins. In our case, this is exactly what happened. Worse still, building officials are discussing code issues with the LLC that owns the adjacent property and are withholding code from us, while allowing construction to continue under apparently non-fire code compliant building plans, which if fully implemented may make part of our property non-fire code compliant. When questioned on these city supported takings of our property rights, officials shift accountability and claim the problems they've caused are a civil matter, meaning they won't do anything to correct their actions unless you sue. The effect of this official disregard is that longstanding residents lose no matter what, either by way of huge legal fees to protect their property rights or by watching helplessly as our property rights are taken by soulless corporate persons. This leaves us overpowered by the economic might of the corporate persons flooding into our city with their money as they influence our officials in their unfair trade rulemaking. To quote Lina Khan, the Biden-appointed chair of the Federal Trade Commission, if in your day-to-day life you're treated like a serf in your economic relations, what does this mean for your civic capabilities, for your experience of democracy? I'll answer that. It means that Ann Arbor has devolved into an illiberal democracy. It's an Orwellian reality where we're surrounded by wonderful art, music and other festivals, street dining and the like, yet year by year the middle class is diminished until at some future point, the serfdom Lina Khan refers to brings about a new age of indentured servitude, where we can no longer afford to pay our property taxes and insurance, and we're forced to abandon our homes and move into some tiny rental owned by guess who. Let's save ourselves by creating.
Thank you, Evan.
We have one more hand raised, Mr. Chair, Mayor of Lower Town. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Hello, this is Tom Stallberg. I'm calling from Lower Town neighborhood in Ann Arbor. I'd like to support the statements from all three previous callers addressing the cooperative issues. Well, let me first say that my main job right now is as a landlord, and the majority of the properties that I and my small investment group have are duplexes. We have long believed in that gentle density concept. The properties that we manage as duplexes are all zoned that way currently. The idea of having more people living in a building in a way that is affordable is vital to our changes here that we're contemplating in Ann Arbor. And the key there is making sure that they're in ways that are affordable. For example, having 4 units on every lot unconditionally might easily give you 4 $1 million condos. If there's nothing conditioning that or incentivizing, nothing conditioning otherwise or incentivizing otherwise, as in sustainability, affordable housing incentives and conditions, we're just going to end up with more unaffordable properties. Cooperative living is one of the models that is more affordable, so I do support that. In terms of our deregulation trend that we're on right now, it does cause the problems like the previous caller just mentioned. And I've also noticed some other issues that that's causing. So I think the key here, as we plan and contemplate changes to increase our density, if we simply deregulate unconditionally, we create all kinds of problems for existing property owners and future ones. And we do not necessarily achieve our goals of sustainability and affordability. We need to build the kind of housing that people can actually afford to own and to rent. And we need to have a livability that is created in our changes so that people will actually want to move here, as opposed to saying, I'm just going to move to that brand new development in the township that offers me a more affordable rental or ownership option. So I'm a believer in missing middle housing. I want to make sure that we have missing middle housing pricing that goes along with missing middle housing types. The two don't automatically go together. And if we simply deregulate unconditionally, all you do is you make people like me wealthier, and you do not achieve the goals that we all strive to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That appears to have been our last caller.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to the presentation from Interface Studios and our comprehensive planning group, Smith, etc. So with that, Ms. Chen, I'll turn it over to you.
Here, I can actually share my screen here.
Yep.
Can everyone see this? Fine.
We
Okay,
can.
great. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for putting us on the agenda tonight. We're looking forward to this discussion. Hopefully, we are going to have more of a discussion, less sharing information. With that said, we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the engagement we've done in the past couple months. Is really just some of the key takeaways, hopefully devoting about 10 minutes to that. But devoting the rest of our time to more discussions around, first, what we're calling these what-if land use scenarios. So these are really kind of hypothetical situations about how Ann Arbor can change in the future, just getting a little more in depth into what some of the positives and negatives of all these scenarios are. These aren't things that are just coming up out of nowhere. They're all things that have come up through our engagement and the conversations we've had. So we have about 4 of those scenarios, hoping to spend about 15 minutes each. And then our third agenda, we're hoping to talk with you a little bit more about some specific proposals that have come up in the past few months that I know have had a few zoning issues, things that haven't necessarily been controversial and are really fit with a lot of the city goals, but haven't been able to smoothly go through the process. So just talk to you a little bit about what some of the hiccups are in that, and hopefully how we can address some of those in this comp plan process. So just again, quick reintroduction. I'm Jamie Granger with Interface Studio. We're the lead consultant. Stacy Chen is here with us tonight as well from Interface. And we also have Kathleen Duffy from Smith Group, who is our local partner on this project. Before we get into the key takeaways, we really just wanted to preface the conversation a little bit about how we're having these conversations about some of these key topics with the public. So some of if you've attended any of our public meetings in the past few months. This will all look pretty familiar to you as some of these slides are pulled directly from there. But one of the first things we're talking about is how Ann Arbor's changed over time, both physically and demographically. So the city has really grown from the core of downtown out to the city limits. And at this point has been pretty fully developed. And when I say that, I mean there's not really any undeveloped land, be it farmland or wooded areas where new development can happen. And that's kind of historically how Ann Arbor grew. From a demographic perspective, there's always been a strong relationship between the growth of the university and the growth of the city. With that said, in the past few months, or the past few decades, the growth of the city has really kind of plateaued, and a higher proportion of that growth can be attributed to the student population. So the remaining residents that are the non-student population is growing older, and family age residents are decreasing. From a land use and potential development perspective, as we talked about, this city is pretty built out. So what we're really talking about is redevelopment of existing properties. But where that can happen currently with existing zoning and floodplain regulations and various other regulations is pretty constricted within the city. So a pretty rough estimate, about 13% of the available land area is currently regulated for redevelopment. So when we're thinking about adding new either commercial or residential properties, it's really constricted to those areas. So we need to think more broadly about where some of that development can happen to address some of the city goals around affordability and sustainability. From a commercial and particularly retail perspective, Ann Arbor has pretty high retail sales. Places like the Briarwood Mall and downtown restaurants and other businesses really cater to a broader region and attract people from all over. But where Ann Arbor's really lacking is some of this more locally serving retail, particularly walkable retail within neighborhoods. There's large swaths of the city that you can't really walk to many amenities. We're also making the note that, there's a need for new residents and density within some of these communities to really support that type of commercial development. So there's really a strong correlation between the two. From a housing perspective, the amount of new construction has really decreased the past few decades relative to some of the portions of Ann Arbor and the decades where there was high growth. That's not surprising, as we've seen the city has been built out and there's less easy to develop areas. By no means has demand decreased. It's probably increased in that Ann Arbor is still a very attractive place to live. The university continues to create jobs. But so now there's really a mismatch between that demand and supply. So to address some of these affordability goals, Ann Arbor really needs to add housing of all different types, be it single family or multifamily, market rate or affordable. We're also having conversations specifically around density in the context of Ann Arbor. So when people hear the word density, they most often their mind goes directly to high-rise student apartments in South U and other areas. But what we're saying is density doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be accessory dwelling units, it could be duplexes or triplexes, and sharing real-world examples of all of these things that are actually happening in Ann Arbor. So it's really a broad swath of different types of development that can help address some of these density issues. And often people don't even know that some of these developments are happening and that they're pretty contextual and fit in with the neighborhood. So again, these are just some of the, how we're framing some of these conversations. But I wanted to turn it over to Kathleen real quickly to talk about some of the major takeaways from the engagement.
Thanks, Jamie. So we were able to meet over close to 400 people in March and April. We had events for the downtown, in the downtown library, and then each of the branch libraries, and just great significant participation. It was really both from the public, but we also had a series of stakeholder kind of small group meetings discussing a lot of this as well. One of the exercises we did, the next slide, Jamie, is kind of taking those 3 key guiding principles that the council set forth and asking folks to kind of identify what that means to them. So this is a quick summary for affordability. Providing variety of housing types for a variety of income levels, thinking about density around downtown and campus, but also beyond housing, affordable transportation and food. And that ties into the equity comments also related to kind of place-based amenities, having access to parks and other ways of getting in and around the city that doesn't require a car, lots of support for public spaces and opportunities for businesses as well. When it comes to sustainability, I think, you see again, housing is talked about, that affordable housing kind of transects all 3 of these topics, but also stuff that has been definitely talked about in the Age of Zero related to sustainability, green infrastructure, a mix of transportation types and how can we build more sustainably. In addition to those 3, we asked folks to fill out this little Mad Libs. And so this some key takeaways from this as well, emphasizing the same kind of things that we had been hearing related to affordable and accessible housing, protecting, our green spaces, additional transportation facilities, again, more diverse housing, and protections for tenants, and inclusive and accessible housing, and making sure that we reach out to those groups that are more diverse. So we've taken some steps since then to try and reach out and get a more diverse sampling of things. The next slide shows how people participated around the entire city and put their dots on what they thought where density should happen. So the green is a higher level of density, yellow kind of moderate building up, and then red is just a little bit. So it's interesting to see some of the citywide takeaways, both more housing throughout and density in these areas that are primarily marked as green. Other key things we heard, again, related to bike lanes, more pedestrian accessibility, taking advantage of the river. I think that's an interesting takeaway as well, that sometimes you don't always know that the river is there, and how can we definitely connect that to downtown better. Again, more thinking about how to incentivize different housing and more affordable housing types, and increase the availability of transit and make sure that it's tied to a variety of multiple mobility options. Again, looking for more neighborhood retail. I mean, it's similar to what Jamie was showing before, where there are places that aren't within walking distance. So what does that look like scattered throughout the city? Apologies, my cat is demanding attention right now. The next slide, please. When we did this for downtown, similarly, those green, yellow, and red, that green was to build up a lot, and we asked them to put their dots by different location throughout the city, throughout downtown, so we can kind of see those circular and circles and ovals on the map. But pretty consistently, people were in favor of densifying across downtown. Some slight variations between those different areas, but 65% said to build up a lot, which is the green. This is the overall takeaways from housing, which is fascinating to see how at the neighborhood meeting specifically, to that point of should we consider permitting 2 to 4 units per parcel across the city's neighborhoods that are single family, and 75% were supportive of that. less than 15 were not supportive. And those, the remainders were open to that and probably could benefit from some of these bullets down at the bottom, to make sure that the housing that could get built in the future, making sure that there are zoning and regulations that can ensure that any new housing fits the context of the neighborhood, some concerns about parking, and then again to that ownership issue, and related to affordability, the challenges that come with that, and being careful that we aren't going to lose ownership opportunities if it all gets converted to rentals. So yeah, great feedback.
Yeah, so these are just some of the, pretty high level takeaways that we're learning from the engagement. It's interesting that, it probably sounded a little repetitive in that we're hearing a lot of the same things. Sometimes in a project, it takes a while to get there, but I think some of these key topics, people are pretty agreeable with some of the issues. But we wanted to move on to more of a discussion, but I guess maybe I'll take a break real fast to see if there's any questions about some of the engagement that we're hearing before I move on. Okay, let's move on. So again, we're calling these land use or what if land use scenarios. And we went through this exercise with the steering committee a couple weeks ago, and it was pretty fruitful. So we thought it might be useful to recreate it with you all. I don't know, Stacy, if you wanted to talk through some of these.
Sure. So we come up with 4 questions, 4 what if questions. Obviously, there are so many more, but we thought these help to spark the conversation and kind of encapsulate some of what we've been hearing. So the first one is, what if we aim to build housing for 50% of the commuters and their families? So that if we took current day commuting patterns, and that is lagging data at any rate, but just for the sake of a, what if question, that would be approximately 35,000 to 40,000 households. Again, because that is just current or actually lagging data, the question is actually, should we aim for more people, perhaps? Because in truth, the University of Michigan has grown, is growing, and probably will continue to grow. There will be more jobs, and they have a plan in place as well. So, there's room there, but we've just thrown this out as a number to get us started. Is what if we think about it in terms of commuters? And the reason why is because commuters are a huge source of carbon emissions, right? And so that's one of the biggest things that Ann Arbor could do to meet some of its sustainability goals. And the second question is looking specifically at single family zoned areas. So what if we added housing so that you could build up to 4 units in single family zones? And again, this is something that we've been talking about with the public through our open houses as a way to achieve some of that missing middle housing, right? Some of that gentle density. The third is about, what if we maximize the residential development in the TC1 districts, other commercial districts, large parking lots, like just maximizing all of those spaces, which in the map that Jamie showed, that 13%, of land that could be redeveloped. I mean, it could be redeveloped, but it is all built out already, right? It's just potential for redevelopment. So if we maximize those, and really though, it's not an either or, it's going to probably be all, right? We have to think about all the different districts, but here are some of the opportunities. And then finally, the question that we're throwing out there is, what if we create another downtown scaled hub elsewhere in the city? For example, a place like Briarwood, which is about the size of downtown, right? And it is zoned in a way that you could develop at higher densities. It could very well create another downtown type of hub within the city of Ann Arbor. So what we wanted to do is spend approximately, Jamie said, like maybe about 15 minutes kind of running through each of these what if questions and thinking through what do we have to gain and what do we have to lose for each of these. So what do we have to gain if we build, housing that could house about 40,000 additional households, for instance. And on the flip side, what do we have to lose? And we will go through and take our notes on this. And of course, after this meeting, we would love to share with you as well what we heard from the steering committee when we conducted this exercise with them. So if we
Yeah.
go ahead.
I might go off. I think I have to stop fully
Stop the
sharing my
share,
screen
Marge.
so I can type in notes, kind of live take notes while we're. So are people still able to? Is this big enough that people can see? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah, I can just
so-
take some notes in here while we go along too, so we can keep track.
Perfect. So Pierre, we'd just like to open it up for discussion.
Okay. So the question is, what if we aim to build housing for 50% of commuters and their families, 35,000 to 40,000 households? I think it's 2.4 people per household per census. So talk about adding nearly 100,000 people to the city. Is that about kind of the thought experiment we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
as Stacy, I think there's about 70,000 non-student residents. So, you essentially be doubling the population, but from the, the flip side, if the university continues to expand it the way it has, then you're essentially just keeping up with growth. So it's, two
Yeah.
ways to look at it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. The first thing that I would actually probably put, I'll kick us off, and then Julie and Donnell, I think we can be pretty casual about this, so just chime in when you can. I think service delivery, so that'll be, I think, like on both sides of the column. And what I mean by service delivery, whether it's schools, parks, roadways, electric capacity, stormwater, wastewater treatment. And so I think of service delivery from like the municipal service level. We gain additional tax revenue to assist with those items. But there's going to be kind of like, it's about managing that growth effectively. And so, and then, what could we lose is shorter term service delivery, right? Like quality of service when you have that much growth. And so we have talked about equitable substation capacity, right? Like one development gets in, underneath the capacity, and then the next one doesn't. So on the gain column, not only property tax revenue, but sales. It drives a lot of retail. So when retailers are looking to figure out which locations they want to go to, they have, a specific per square foot revenue projections that they have. It's based on vehicle per day, population, like regional market share, things of that nature. So we could see more national tenants look more seriously, right? Because the vehicle per day or counts might look better. What might we lose? Service delivery of smaller retail tenants. I don't know. I'm just, and this is me kind of spitballing, and my notes are in my other room right now because I did kind of write both columns. But the question really is, will the market, will we have enough financing momentum and developers that, say, hey, can we deliver? Does the market call for this, right? So zoning can only, do so much, but that's a different, I think, question altogether. But yeah, let me please continue the conversation. Let me go grab my notes real quick.
Yes, please. And I did want to also mention, again, just a reminder to the committee and the members of the public that we are talking about a rather long time frame of approximately 25 years. We're, aiming for the year 2050. So although the hope is that eventually Ann Arbor will be able to absorb more households, it's not happening overnight. Would any other commissioners like to chime in?
Yeah, so I think, this is Julie, I think kind of along those lines, I'm in a similar vein of like, on the one hand, and on the other hand,
Yeah,
exactly. is things, you know, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have empty retail buildings. I live on South Main. There's a lot of empty retail in the new buildings because of various reasons. But you know, you would hope that having more people means just basically, if nothing else, that people wouldn't put up with empty retail in a when there's just more people, and that those buildings couldn't sit empty in a way that now you know, they're making what they need to make based on housing. And if we kind of, because the housing needs are so great for what we have, we don't have a lot of leverage for saying, hey, you need to make your housing better or more affordable or more accessible, or because it's such a constrained market that if we have more options for housing, the hope would be that housing sort of generally is more responsive to the needs of the community. I think sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it is a rocky road to get there, where it does get there eventually. But I know, you know, right now, a lot of people say, well, we need more affordable housing at all levels of affordability. But because we're so housing constrained, that's not how it plays out. We don't just build affordable housing because that's not where it's not what the market does. So I think, you know, we can definitely gain if we have a more right-sized housing market, but what we might lose is also single family houses, neighborhoods, those sorts of feelings, at least in the short term. I think long term, you don't really know what house was there before you got there. And it is just what it is. But the process of watching that happen. And I live in a neighborhood where it is changing, and and that can be difficult. I mean, I think we had a public speaker who was saying, you know, wow, my reality in this process is not the yay, we're building more housing. It's that my housing options seem less good during that process. So I think what we might lose often for me is a transitory issue, but it is a long time. I mean, that can be 20 years of that feeling that way, or so.
Julie, I could probably add on to that. So, because I'd written in here, what might we gain? Improved affordability. I mean, you build 35, 40,000, that's pretty simple. We may or may not get decreased property values. It may stay, you know, but in theory, if you added this much, right, like it should trade for less, right? You add this much supply. I had, and Julie, I think to kind of speak to what you were talking about, loss of character might be one of the things we might lose, which is kind of like the old West Side, or, you know, single story kind of like cute facades with porches might be now 10 porches. You know, I'm thinking of that Mary Court, which I think you guys have actually an example of later. But I wrote here, yeah, what do we gain? We have better economic case for improved transit, because transportation really kind of relies on ridership forecasts. So, and I also just wrote down more talent, like period, right? Like you need people to do stuff. And, I mean, those folks working crazy hard on AI might possibly differ, but more talent is, I think, definitely something we would gain if we added 40,000 houses. And then, yeah, on the loss side, you know, when we talk about character, I wrote down kind of like homogeneity, right? The 5/1s, the kind of like very, very similar looking building types. Materiality is kind of like similar. So I think I took a quiz online at, you know, I think they know to track me because I might be interested in something like that. But they were like, showed 4 pictures of like different apartment buildings, they're like, where am I? And pick the city. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Is it Seattle? Is it Colorado? But yeah, so homogeneity, because again, like a lot of these developers will look at, hey, yeah, this is what works. This is the materials we have access to, right? In this particular region. So homogeneity and character loss.
Think of it as funky little neighborhoods.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a few others. But Donnell, anything to weigh in here? I know.
Yeah, I think on the what might we gain, obviously neighbors, which I think is super important. So there are new people who will come. They're going to come with life and vitality and creativity. They're going to come with a vision for what the city should look like that isn't already present. And I think that is something that's super important. We've also hit the tax revenue, but I want to be more specific because the school district has lost about 1,100 students in the last decade. If we're looking at a horizon for 2050 and we maintain a household percentage, which is sort of standard in Michigan, of about 27% of households have kids under 17, and assuming they enroll in the public schools, we could see somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 new students that are coming into the district. I don't know what that would mean in terms of net gains, because obviously students matriculate, graduate, and move on, but that is definitely something to consider. There's all the climate implications here, because commuters are commuting in, and in Michigan, that often means you're driving. That often means you're driving a single vehicle. So we're going to get less vehicular miles traveled. That may also have sort of a unintended benefits of less accidents, less car-related deaths, less crashes into commercial entities, like just happened over the weekend, because less people are driving, because they're living in more dense neighborhoods where they're able to walk to consume the amenities that they're looking for. And so I think there's just a lot of upside that we see here on the gains. In terms of what we might lose, I was really struggling just personally with this, because the city has capacity probably to go to 250. So we're not really looking here. And I think for me, I think what is lost is that we're not actually looking to take more than 50%, but something like 80 or 90% of the commuters off. And I think that is a loss, that we're looking at a 2050 horizon. We're not looking over the next 5 years. So what would it mean for us to remove all of the commuters who wanted to come and live in Ann Arbor to have an opportunity to live here? And so those are my initial thoughts there.
Great, thank you. I think that is a good point. And going back to that whole point of, we just pulled this number. It certainly isn't a decision. It's just a what if 50%? But as the original question asked, like, should we be talking about more? And especially given the anticipated growth of the University of Michigan, both in terms of jobs and students. Let's move on to the next question.
So can I do
yes.
One question, and I don't know, I just kind of want to throw this out there because it's something that I hear a lot, which is, and I don't know if there's any data on it or if it's just people being reactionary or just, but is one of the things that I hear people say a lot is, yeah, I am never going to live in such a dense area. We have lots of places around Ann Arbor where I can live in a single family home, where I can have a yard. I don't care if Ann Arbor builds 100,000 more units. I'm never going to live there because of X, Y, or Z. And I just wonder a little bit on the sort of what might we gain, what might we lose if we change our sort of standard housing type, which I think is absolutely fair to do. Do we lose some people because of that do we
Mhm.
gain? Obviously, we're hoping to gain people because of it, but is there any sort of downside of having more housing units? I guess is kind
Right.
of the,
Yeah, I hear you. And that is a conversation we had with our steering committee as well. And I think it's kind of, the way we talked about it is you're not necessarily losing this housing type. People are not going to wholesale redevelop every single family house into a duplex or a triplex. Many people will decide, I'm going to keep my single family house. Even though the zoning changes, I'm not going to do anything. So you can already build ADUs in the city, and very few have been built. You know, like we're opening up the choices, essentially. We're not removing a housing type. We're opening up to additional housing types. But I definitely hear what you're saying, and that some people are concerned that we will be losing single family housing. I think that as a type, though, it will most likely continue. And probably in a fair amount of abundance, but to your point, and as already exists, people are choosing and always have to in many cities to get more space outside of, you can get your single family home more space more affordably outside. And so this option is really just about expanding what you could do with a property. But thank you. I think that is a really important point that people have brought up. Let's go on to this one, which is very specifically about the single family, because I think we've kind of naturally headed in that direction. So what if we add housing to single family zoned areas, allowing up to 4 units? That does not mean you're going to build 4 units on every part. There are some parcels physically, dimensionally, you can't, right? There's still dimensional standards. So it just will allow for those parcels where it is physically possible, it will allow the owners of the parcels to build up to 4
Well,
units. What if?
I'll get us started. So one of the things that I hear in our neighborhood, we live in the Lansdowne neighborhood, which I think has about 900 single family R1Cs in it, in the neighborhood boundary. And the neighbors have communicated that, they bought their home 15 years ago or 20 years ago, some even 25 years ago, raised their kids. And now they have too large a house, and not being able to do anything with the house is sort of a potential harm for them. So they can't really age in place. So I think some of the things we gain here is that people can age in place because they could convert their single family home into a duplex, live in one side, rent out the other. They could also do that for their family. So they have a kid who is now married and maybe have kids and is trying to get started, but entering our housing market is very challenging. In that same neighborhood, there's one house for sale. It's for sale at $725,000. The cost of entry as a starter home is just completely out of reach for someone who's just getting started, because we don't have that kind of stock in this neighborhood. So having that flexibility of being able to have up to multiple units, I think you gain. I think you get something that Commissioner Lee spoke about in the previous slide. I think you get different housing stock and topographies. We have friends that live in downtown Grand Rapids, and there are lots of large single-family homes that have been converted into apartments, and you cannot tell walking down the street from the street level that it's not a single occupant, single-family home. But some of those units have up to 8 units that they have been able to create out of those homes, which make the neighborhood very vibrant. Lots of families being able to move in different configurations, so that it makes it easier. So I think we actually gain some of that character of the neighborhood that we are talking about, because developers will have to figure out, like, how do we keep this multi-unit development looking like the rest of the housing. And so that means not everything's going to go high. Some things may go out, or the accessory dwelling unit kind of thing, or granny flats and things along those lines, which then allow people to stay together. So I think those are some of the things that I was thinking about that we gain by allowing that.
I think all really good points. Yeah, flexibility, infill. What might we lose? Probably a worthwhile trade-off to me, but possibly less permeable surface area. If we have, infill on people's lawns or something like that. But and so long as we do, proper stormwater retention control, like systemically throughout. There's some neighbors or some neighborhoods that may push against this concept, and I think actually I default to things like Ann Arbor Hills area, Burns Park. I don't know, I don't necessarily mean to impute some of those things. I've just asked a brief few number of folks, and, trying to get their take on this as well. But yeah, I think overall we would also have to probably look at making sure that our code practically aligns with this. So we probably need staff dedicated time towards looking at setback requirements. It's kind of the ADUs concept that we were okay with it, but we recognize that some of the setbacks might have been onerous. So I think we need fine tuning the UDC. So if we did do this, we would have to probably look towards more procedural and practical elements of like, how can this actually be effective in creating infill? And I actually think that if we add housing to single family zoned up areas allowing up to 4 units, I think we need to have what might we gain? I think we would gain a requirement to improve more intentional public spaces. And what I mean by that is the higher the density, less kind of like recreational area means that we, I think of New York and Central Park, right, as kind of an example. Like that's an extreme example, right? But there's a paper I wrote long time ago in planning school about it was a correlation between neighborhood community efficacy and high rises. Because I was born in Korea, I realized that, hey, like I only knew the neighbors that were like across the hall when I lived in Korea, and I was also a kid. But when I moved here, I knew a lot of our neighbors, and I was starting to kind of try to figure out why is this? And it's the provision of successful public spaces. So in high rises, for example, it's your elevator shaft, it's your mailbox. That's where you run into people, right? So it's a pretty limited. So I think as we if really kind of on this concept of like increased density, even if it's something as simple as single family zones, up to 4 units, I think we need to have, we probably have, an increased requirement to have intentional public spaces from that respect. And one of the things that, I think that I wrote at the end of the paper, it's density can be done well. There is there's a possible negative correlation between neighborhood efficacy and high rises without successful public spaces. So this is just a very kind of important element from my perspective. Yeah, I think neighborhood protectionism is maybe we lose that. But those are kind of that's what I have written out: flexibility, infill, protections, permeable surface area. So
yeah, I think I agree with all that. I also think because I live in an R4C zone, so I'm already in a duplex enabled zone. I agree that, not everybody's going to choose to do it. I also think it's going to be very different, and what might we gain, what might we lose. And in listening to Commissioner Weish talking about, in his neighborhood, people are going to want to build more like Lansdowne and have it be more, design around the existing area. I think that changes in different neighborhoods. In my neighborhood, the new builds have absolutely tried not to be the same because they're going to a different market. They don't want the sort of old single family home type style. They actually want a more kind of forward looking modern aesthetic. So I think it really will depend on the neighborhood for what happens. Just like it does now, like a new home that's built is going to depend on what the neighborhood, and I hadn't really thought about that before, but these are going to, have different effects in different neighborhoods. I also agree. One of the things we were talking about is like neighborhood halls. A lot of areas, I don't think Ann Arbor so much has that, is sort of public areas. We count on our parks as being very much the public areas, and we have a lot of parks, but places you can have a birthday party that's outside but undercover, and if you don't have a yard to do that, which I think it's absolutely fine not to have a yard to do that because housing is great, but people are still going to want to have that neighborhood feel. And if we are going to keep the parks, and I think we could do some housing on some parks, but if we say we're going to keep the parks, then we need to make them open and accessible and with some covered areas so that what we are used to as a yard and the functions there can be done in a more collective way if we have housing in those places. Because I think those still have value, but I don't know that everyone needs to have that value in their yard. Like kids aren't required to have a yard to be happy to grow up.
Yeah.
I would add to the what might we gain while we're still on this one. We would actually reduce the urban sprawl that is taking place in the townships with, again, more density in these neighborhood zones. So it keeps people closer to amenities as opposed to them having to go out and then commute in, because we gain affordability. And I know that lots of people have different opinions about whether or not there is an actual supply side application to housing. So we'll let the researchers continue to do research and produce papers on that. But let's assume there is some validity to those researched arguments that more housing supply actually brings down costs. And I think that some of that, especially in our market, is something that we would gain, making the city just a little bit more affordable for folks.
Fantastic. Being mindful of time, so I'm going to move us along a little bit. These are all really great responses. And the next one we talked about was, what if we maximize the residential development in TC1 districts and commercially zoned areas, which include, large parking lots. So again, these are places that are already built. These would be redevelopments. So keeping in mind that these do have businesses located there currently. So given this scenario, anybody want to kick it off?
I don't know if this is the most obvious of answers, but we would gain more housing. probably more bus routes. I said probably an increased requirement in investing in our right of way. So whether it's complete streets, but it would probably require us to gain control of a better demand forecasting for different types of travel. And we often talk about, hey, we have to do our part on the right of way on the TC1 side of things. They can build all they want, but we talked about State and Packard, I think, was an example of how it's, it's like a 6-line weird intersection that makes it very inhospitable. And those kinds of things need to be thought through. What might we gain? A new skyline? And I just mean by building shapes. And it sounds exciting, but also tough to know what that variation might look like. Because I'm thinking of what if we maximize resi development, I think of not having the the height requirements that are based on the proximity or distances. So I think about the metrics by the mechanisms by how we would achieve this. But maximizing residential developments, we would gain nodes of density that would create yeah, differing traffic patterns. And what might we lose? Maybe the traffic gets enough for people to say, you know what, I'm just gonna ride my bike, or I'm gonna try to ride the bus. At least there's a dedicated lane. So maybe a decreased, what might we lose? Reliance on a singular occupant, vehicular miles traveled.
Which is also a gain.
Yeah, right. Just trying to be, but this one, a lot of the questions I think have like similar thematic elements. And so, for me, the nodes of density and within the highway belt is something that I think we gain, but also we may lose some, existing building product of retail that would require retail to start clustering. So possibly embodied carbon. I don't know. But I'll let Julie and Donnell weigh in too. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think having experienced a little bit of this in my area is you will, as these developments change and at this point residential is more valuable, I think, from a standpoint, small local businesses could be pushed out. I have yet to see small local businesses come back into a development that was built where they used to be, no matter what people said initially. It doesn't, I think it would have to be a very specific development to, have your shop come back into a large building after it was built. I think that's just not something that would happen in a decade, maybe 2 decades, but it's not going to happen. So loss of small local businesses, I think, could be is that everybody moves into their residential, but that retail is either very franchise, large corporate, or just not existing anymore because of the way the market rolls.
Yeah.
I also think that there is a potential for sort of difficulty living together. You have deliveries that happen at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. for retail, where you have residential where that is an uncomfortable situation. You have noise, you have lights, all that. But I also think that for me, TC1 districts should be not only maximized, but allowed, but also that it is an area where I think people can envision what that looks like. They won't be surprised if there is noise next to that. Like, I think it's an area that we should absolutely maximize residential as much as possible, as sort of high as possible, but just understanding that it's a change, and that change can again be uncomfortable. And long term, I think those small businesses will prosper, and we're not going to get rid of small businesses, but because right now we have the situation where people are having a hard time with retail in small businesses. So this hopefully could change that. But I think that's something that will be visible to people and sort of show people like, hey, I used to go to Jack's Hardware and now there's a big apartment building by Jack's Hardware, and see, this is why we don't want this to happen. Because I used to be able to walk to a hardware store and now I can't. So I think it's a difficult sort of PR when during the changes, it's difficult.
It's perspective gentrification, really loss of local businesses. The nationals obviously have they're a little more repeatable, right? They have processes and I guess I think of Austin, right, which is a city that has exploded in growth. It's like there's not even anything that's closer, right? But oftentimes I also hear, like it was great because it was quirky, right? And like that's what Ann Arbor's kind of going for it, right? We have a quirky environment here, and so and I know that the comment of like loss of character is pretty ethereal. It's kind of vague. So I don't necessarily want to say that, but I also, have heard say again, what keeps things unique here. So that's got to be, a real focal point as we focus on growth, and that's what zoning is kind of like intended for, right? Like the restriction of like the Wild West kind of thing. Often, yeah, Julie, I think you mentioned noise, which is an interesting one too. I mean, we'd probably get more noise, period. We'd probably gain, traffic jams, as I talked about. So the traffic is going to be, definitely more vehicles. I mean, until we can provide, alternatives, like people will still probably default to it. Let's look at just the percentages of how most people, household commutes. Until it gets too inconvenient or too expensive, or it's a pricing issue or an access issue. I think so. Air pollution is definitely one of them, right? That's just a byproduct of growing and growth. We talk also like what do we also gain is a stress on our electrical systems. I'm going to kind of focus on some of the, again, absolutely improved affordability, and improved access, healthier vacancy rate. Like what we have is not healthy. Just keeps driving price up. And so anything sub 2%, a healthy environment should have like a 5% loss factor. And it's like every apartment is like immediately leased. So I talked about the trade-offs with infrastructure growth. So to me, like the critical infrastructure of sanitation and health, when we think about like really, really huge, density, I also just want to make sure that it's a healthy environment as well. And so that's obviously huge. But yeah, and then what other, we would probably get a tremendous amount of, as I said, improved property tax revenue and improved funding. We would get overall kind of, I think, also additional talent. I keep coming back to that one, but as office landlords, one of the things, first things we say is make it easy for talent attraction and talent retention. Those two, and people want to lease from you. So I think that's some of the items, and just learning how to balance that growth in a way that's preserving the quirkiness of what makes Ann Arbor, right? So
I think for me, we're going to see the benefits. We're going to be able to see some new utilization of space here if we were to try to maximize this, especially as I think about parking lots, which often can sit empty during large periods of time. So I work for a church, and we worked very hard to try to utilize our building. We're up to 6 days a week. And in the past, we've had 7 days a week of utilization, but we still have a very large parking lot. And we do make that parking lot available to all of the businesses that are around us, and even to the housing that's coming in across the street. So I think we would see some new utilization of the space there. Something we haven't talked about is because of the constraint of housing in our community, those who are very housing unstable, like the victims of domestic violence, there's not like temporary housing. There's just not a space for someone to move in, get established, and then be able to move out. So the domestic violence shelter in town, when we met with them, they talked about how they were designed for 30 to 60 days, but they're having people stay up to 100 to 120 to 180 days, which then means they can't bring in new clients who desperately need that housing. So we don't have transitional housing. And there was just a sort of network alert that went out this week around someone that Jewish Family Services was trying to resettle. And so where could someone come and immediately get? And so I think having a little bit more maximization in the TC1 can help with that. I totally recognize what Commissioner Weatherby talked about in terms of some of the impact of these commercial spaces on the existing small businesses. But once the new spaces are built, then new small businesses are able to come into those spaces. And while we're not seeing that universally in all of the developments that have happened in the city, I do think there is the potential for us to see new mixed use benefits. We also, because TC1 calls for the activation of the front, sort of the front facades of these buildings, and in some cases, them being 2 stories, it just changes things so that you don't have like our very suburban setback. I think we have like a 45-foot, maybe a 50-foot setback from Platte Road. Well, our building could be right at the sidewalk. There is no reason for us to have that much unutilized space. So I think those kinds of things that come through that zoning will be helpful. I think Commissioner Lee also talked about public transit, because you bring in more folks and then we can justify the transit, because I think that's been a challenge is, well, we'd love to put a bus line there, but there's no utilization. So then you bring these folks in and you get that utilization. I don't want to underestimate the impact that it does have on existing folks, but I will say, you mentioned Jack's Hardware. When that new development was announced, they said if it goes through, they'll relocate downtown, right? So existing businesses are also able to negotiate these changes. And I think the other thing that we get is that we're just not stagnant. I think that's just something that hasn't been said yet tonight. And I think it is helpful. It is about vitality. It is about life. It is about sort of the newness. And I think we gain all of those things. I think Commissioner Lee said it better when he said we get more talent. I'll say we get more talent and creativity. And I think those 2 things make the city the things that we love about the city, because there are people who aren't here who will make Ann Arbor what it is going to be in 2050, but they need to get here. They need to be in the community. They need to start to work on what's going to be that dynamic, because in 25 years, there's going to be a whole different group of people sitting here talking about their version of the funky Ann Arbor, or the creative Ann Arbor, or the vital, Ann Arbor. And I would just want to make sure that we're making as much space for those people to come as we did for those who are already here.
That's great. Sorry. Do you want to throw one more?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to, because I talked kind of about like, hey, what are the challenges associated with, fast growth, like pollution and things like that. I also wanted to add, just from like a Jane Jacobs perspective, what might we gain is actually improved safety, right? When we have more eyes on the street, when we have more civility and socialization, I think that always helps to try to improve safety. But it's also, known that, quicker urbanization can also lead to more socioeconomic disparities, which need to be kind of intentionally addressed as we go through the growth. So more entertainment cultural options broadly. So I think with more funding, you could have, a more expansion of the, the hands-on museum, or, things of that nature. So I think one of the great things is that there's been a good value trade-off for Ann Arbor. We get world-class talent in a small town feel, but we should be able to actually even increase the wide array of services. Like, instead of going to the Toledo Zoo, maybe there's one here, something along those lines. And I think we also already have incredible healthcare, but I think that we probably have more porosity. So it's not like you're just going to the main hospital, but probably more 15-minute neighborhoods if we're able to, increase the density in these zones of TC1. And I also think that, in this goes back to that first question, what happens if we, we build 50,000 new households? We probably need an entire new school. And so I think Donnell was talking about, how many 5 to 10,000 kids. We probably need 5 schools. I mean, actually, it's an incredible number. So so I think increasing the selection, or I'm sorry, increasing the availability and the optionality, just is always kind of a positive accelerant, I think, for overall urbanization. So I think the concept of improved safety is huge. I think like any living cities that's safe is huge. We talk about Vision Zero. So in so long as we're able to, create an environment that's less reliant on vehicles, or at least create it as a node. So like people who, outside of Ann Arbor, if you want to come there, park your car and then be able to, take the bus into, wherever you want. And if it acts as that kind of transitionary node, I think that's great. And it also, again, improves safety. So to me, it's really about like all of these things help to, diversify talent, to improve safety, to increase options for people's, and the fact is, I talked about successful public spaces. And sidewalks are also successful public spaces. So, kids learn in all kinds of places, right? And so the city effectively becomes like a massive kind of like sidewalk backyard for them. So I think those are, yeah. So hopefully I want to talk about all the positive things that come with growth too, because I don't want to seem like a naysayer. So, yeah.
No, thank you. I mean, this is the thing. We've got both. We gain some things, we lose some things, and we just kind of hash through it all is the purpose of this. But we have one last question.
Can I just say one thing for the TC1,
yes.
just a quick, is also connections to other areas like Ypsilanti or Saline or Chelsea Dexter or Ann Arbor Township, which when we talk about hospital and stuff, increasing those connections to other areas is also important, and to be a hub for that.
Great. Okay, just keeping track of where we are. We've got one last question, one what if question, and then we definitely want to spend some time talking about some of the zoning issues that have come up recently. So the last one is, what if we create another downtown type of hub elsewhere in the city? The example being a place like Briarwood. What if that gets redeveloped as some sort of a mixed use district of a similar scale and density? What do we have to gain and what do we have to lose in that scenario?
All right, let's see. Economic diversification is something that we might get out of that, especially if it's in a different area or is more sort of transit oriented than the downtown is. Accessibility, so people can get to things closer and easier, which I think is super helpful. And then, of course, job creation is another huge opportunity here. Some of the losses is resources may feel a little constrained because, how do you distribute these two very significant allocations of resources? A new transportation hub may need to be created. We have one downtown, but we need to create one there. So that's sort of a loss because you'd have to replicate that system. And then the potential for market saturation, because then you're sort of oversampling some of the commercial spaces that you have in the two spaces, but that may not happen. Maybe Ann Arbor has enough capacity to absorb all of that without any issue.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we already have sort of townlets. We have Stadium Boulevard area, we've got downtown, we have, North Side area. And I've seen sort of downtowns created. They don't usually work that well if they're just wholesale created. But if you give opportunities for people and businesses to move in, then it creates kind of what it needs to be. So I think being able to create the opportunities, the zoning, the services that allow residents and businesses to come into an area like Briarwood is great, because I think that will, it kind of creates what it needs to be. And whether we call that a downtown or whether it has, is kind of in some ways to me immaterial. Like if you're gonna say, hey, we're gonna create downtown 2.0, I don't know that works. But if you create the opportunity for what is needed in an area, I think that is really valuable. So I guess from my perspective, like a downtown scaled hub, I think creating the opportunity is the important part.
You would probably lose surface area parking lots that are the size of Briarwood.
Yes, you would. I would assume.
Yeah. So, yeah, sorry, I can't, I'm like, oh, what's the most obvious thing we lose? Yeah, probably parking lots, but I think I'm okay with that.
Can you put that under the gain column for me?
Yeah, that's also a gain.
Impervious surface that could go under both.
Yeah. What might we gain? The opportunity to do regional style microgrids. I don't, I know we talked a little bit about Southtown as a, the microgrid, but especially if you're planning for it, something like that, maybe it's something that's possible. I don't know, it's just challenging for sure, and certainly unconventional, and banks don't like unconventional. So, just the other thing, I'm just throwing this out, legibility, that actually might be a loss, right? Like, what downtown truly is. That's downtown. It starts at Main and Williams and goes north. Once you hit Huron, it's over. Right? So I don't know. Obviously I love our downtown, and you wonder, and I think that regionalism and growth, that same comment about legibility applies regionally too. When you looked at the very start, you guys had the Washtenaw County growth overlaid with the city of Vancouver growth, right? So and like the idea is, let's grow the pie for everybody, but certainly I don't want it to be at the detriment of like Adrian or something like that, right? And so but it's ever evolving, right? I was just texting my friend about I think it's I-75, and how when the Mackinac Bridge was going up and I-75 was kind of bifurcating, or not bifurcating, but actually skipped over that little town, St. Ignatius. It totally changed that town forever, right? And so there are going to be, and that's obviously like federal level transit that changes the town, but I think about legibility, node, and competition regionally, and so that and the hope is that, again, there's enough innovation, there's enough value creation, the quality of life is strong, so you want the region, the state to thrive. So I don't, so that's just a thought. I don't know whether that's a gain or a loss or anything like that. It's something I think about honestly from time to time. So, but yeah.
Great. All right, well, we are closing in on 8:30, and I want to make sure we devote time to the next piece. Zoning proposals discussion. And I think, Hank, are you gonna just
I can
get us
just
up
do
to
a quick
speed here?
intro here.
Right.
The consultant team asked what the subcommittee might be interested in and what conversations were happening at the council table would relate to this. And I think you all are maybe have heard me say too many times, please bring up the things that you're interested in the subcommittee. So I wanted to make sure we connected the conversations from your last couple of meetings. There were on 5-7 a pre-PUD petition for 1146 South Maple, which had setbacks challenges and was proposing PUD. in order to fit in what maybe was similar to an R4E development. And also from your most recent meeting, you'll remember pretty well the 601 Mary Court proposal. There was a lot of discussion about that, which involved a variety of things, nonconformities, setbacks, also neighborhood character, infill considerations. And I wanted to basically just marry those different discussions to say how, in reacting to where we are in the comprehensive plan process with thinking through zones and making sure that even in this discussion, it was mentioned, we will need to make sure that we can do these things according to our code. I wanted the consultants to hear from some of you firsthand what kind of problems with our current paradigm these projects signal, and what you would like to have seen differently under a new code or a new reality, for example, with these projects. And they don't have to just be these projects, but these seem to generate a fair amount of discussion, and they brought up a lot of different issues.
Can I jump in?
You
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So because I complained about both of these, so I'll at the table, because they both have to come in as PUDs because the way that our code is written. They could come in my view, through the existing zoning, except the existing zoning seems to have a lot of emphasis on restrictions. So instead of just saying, hey, you have this lot with these sort of reasonable setbacks, the building's too long. And if the building exceeds a certain length, we're going to tack on like inches of setback that has to happen based on this sort of threshold of the length of the building. And then you get into this conflicting land use between, which we've tried to mute through some code changes, but the 1146 South Maple, this is the same developer. So it's affordable housing, which is what we want to build. They own the property to the east. Well, north, sorry. But there's a setback that they have to have from this property because they're separate lots. And so it's like, oh my gosh, we have created this in a sense, our code has created this nightmare, and we can't actually achieve the thing that we want, which is we want you to have a lot like this and build housing on it, but we've constructed the code in such a way that we've made it difficult. You can't do it in our existing zoning. You have to do a new zoning definition in order to create this. And I just, and this ties into what we were even talking about in the R1 zones, and I'm just going to overlap for just a second, so if you will permit me, which is, if in that conversation we were trying to measure things by the units as opposed to just the area placement and height, of just saying, hey, you have a lot, it shouldn't exceed 40 feet. It should have 10 feet of setback all around it. And we don't actually have a strong opinion about how many units you put into that, as long as you fit within this criteria. And developers are creative, right? So they will say, this gives us a lot of flexibility. And I think the thing that I am experiencing in our code, our existing code seems to be against density. And we see that a lot. So something is zoned R4C, and then the developer wants to put more density on it. But in order to do that, you have to go through this quotient to achieve that, right? So City Council has said, we want to densify the city. But our code is still stuck in what I perceive as a penalty for density, where we then have to overcome the zoning in order to achieve the density. And then we double tax. So you're already paying into the affordable housing millage with a property. But when you want to exceed the underlying zoning, there's a criteria now where you get taxed again in order to achieve that. And that reveals to me that we don't actually want the zone, the density, because the code seems to be very restrictive with regard to it. And then if you go to 601 Mary, that one was slightly different because the developer themselves didn't want to go as dense as we wanted to. But here we've got easements in. So the developer is now restricted in what they want to do because they have to abide by a 30-foot easement, and the existing easement is 25 foot, and they're like, gosh, if we could keep it the way it is, we'd be able to do this thing. But nope, we've got a 30-foot easement, so now they have to sort of constrain themselves to try to keep it into this. So those were the things that were striking to me, was like, you're doing the thing we want. You're bringing a product into the community. This is not a high rise. This is, I think, what, 4 units in each. And it's going to be affordable because there's going to be a high rise across the street from it, which will, you know, probably have a different price point. But we've made it difficult for this developer who already owns this property to redevelop it and to increase the density. And I just hope that as we move through this process, we can acknowledge that in the comp plan and highlight where there's this conflict between what City Council has said they wanted to achieve in this process and then what our UDC is actually going to produce. Because you're not going to give us text amendments for our UDC. You're going to just give us the comp plan to say, hey, here's where you should do the things you want to do. Now it's up to you to change all of your code to achieve that. And I think that's a huge disconnect still for a lot of us. And I just want to highlight that. And I appreciate Deputy Planning Manager Kelly for bringing this up tonight. I was delighted to see that in the change in the slide deck. So thanks.
Yeah, I think to kind of add on to that, for me, it's simplification, obviously, because, you know, some of our codes are just so complicated that it's hard for the professionals to figure out, much less people kind of trying to understand it. The other thing is zoning that creates the built infrastructure we want, which a lot of times is the actual built infrastructure we have, but our zoning, and R4C is the one I'm most comfortable with, our zoning is specific to discourage the existing built infrastructure because it was done at a time when we didn't want all those little houses close together. We wanted big front yards and we wanted bigger side setbacks. So our R4C, I think it's 85% of the buildings are out of compliance. Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, we need to have something that both reflects our existing built infrastructure, but also encourages what we do want, but not in the same way that it was done as like a wholesale. We want everything to change and be bigger, and which didn't really work because it hasn't. I mean, 85% of these in that zoning code are out of compliance. So I think, you know, kind of a understanding of both, as I say, simplification, but then also allowing some of the things that are there, like a Mary Court, to exist and to be rebuilt if it needed to be, but also to, you know, to make the built infrastructure that we like, or to allow the built infrastructure that we allow, which is, again, maybe it's less about punitive and more about what can you build, not what can't you build, given the easements, the property lines, that all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I feel like everybody else covered pretty well. I mean, lot sizes, dwelling unit, you know, restrictions and setbacks. I think that's predominantly what caused these PUDs to come before us. And So yeah, I mean, it's like, do we micromanage or do we set context and let them, the market kind of dictates. But also it can't be, it can't be just be free for all. But so we certainly need a certain level of rules and regulations, but rules and regulations that's easy to understand. Like it really shouldn't take, a graduate education for a property owner to know what they can do with their site. And so we have to have, and the comp plan is going to do just that, right? It's going to set the appropriate context for us to really kind of take a look at setbacks, take a look at dwelling unit counts and lot size requirements. So, but yeah, no, I think well said to both Donnell and Julie. So not much more to add other than setbacks, side setbacks, rear setbacks, dwelling units, and lot size. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
I just had a question about process. I'm curious why, at least for the Mary Court, that they went through the PUD process rather than just get like a typical variance. Just because this is a pretty unique property in Ann Arbor, so it may be difficult to fit a zoning code to fit a property like this. And, that's the point of a variance process to really, for some of these areas that don't necessarily fall under the code, but just curious from a process perspective.
Well, that is at the pre-petition phase. It's likely that they will pursue a PUD, but it's not actually known exactly which course of action they'll take. I think maybe the perspective was just that it would be too cumbersome to go through the process. But
Yeah, that's what I was going to argue.
Through the variance process than the PUD process.
Yeah, because you'd have more, you know how that process is going to go. You know what you have to do, you know how to work with planning, because that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, a lot of what's coming to the table is coming as a PUD because the zoning is not working for developers. And whether or not that's a good indication or a bad indication, I'm still discovering as I sit at the table and listen to these developments. But I agree with you, like, I don't think this should have to come through as a PUD, but it can't come in as R4E because the lot size, which is what Commissioner Lee just brought up, doesn't fit that. And so that's the only place that has the density, right? So at R4C, it's what, 20 units per acre or something. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's actually lot size. That's basically what it is. They couldn't come in as R4C, they couldn't come in as R4E. And so when you can't meet the existing zoning, then you come as a PUD. Your question, I asked a similar question at the table, is we're the body that manages the UDC. Can we just amend it to make this work for them? And the planning manager said, well, yes, but that's going to take even longer than a PUD would, because you'd have to notice a community, you'd have to have public hearings, et cetera, et cetera. So.
And not to mention, could you imagine saying, hey, yep, I want to bring this project forward, but I want a variance in the density. I want a variance for the front yard. I want the variance for the side yard. I want
like an everything variance.
Like literally every single category. So I think that's probably what led to their decision overall. But, and also, like, granted, I think Mary Court is kind of exceptional. I think this is more, exceptional than the norm, I think, just because these lots are really, really small and kind of bizarre. But I do also think it is an interesting point that we are seeing more and more PUDs, even though that means, it's like the city can ask for whatever they want. But and I think there was that even the one that came on Church Street, which we talked about proportionality. They were like, you know what? I'm gonna take my chances at the city council. Thanks. And so, I think it's that context setting rather than the kind of like the regulatory framework. They're just like, let me just go forward with city council and see if the PUD, because this is what we believe is the right context. And so, but that being said, again, flexibility and being able to, I think on a last, why did this come forward? And Jamie, so I think a lot of us actually have similar reactions when we get like, oh, another PUD. I wonder why
Yeah,
this one didn't work.
it's just, I was just curious, just because, you know, thinking of Philadelphia, we're from, like, the variance process is like fairly easy, and the city like basically rubber stamps them. Like, I think they approve like 90% of variances, but getting a zoning change would be like a much more complicated process, but it's almost like the inverse in Ann Arbor, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And one of the things that I also would love to, see, and probably if I had more time, I'd do some more research, would be, how comparable university towns, right, have used zoning to kind of distinguish, because this is clearly kind of like student housing area. But like whether it's, I think like UC Berkeley or Boulder, Colorado, or Madison, Wisconsin, or something like that. It's how have they dealt with like university related growth versus organic town growth? And so those kinds of case studies might be just interesting. I mean, I know we look to them for a lot of different ideas as well, but so I just food for thought. So like if I had infinite time just to do research, that's probably what I start looking at.
Well, Boulder is even worse because there's height limits in addition to everything else. So
Yeah, for sure. But you know what we talked about, what's been interesting is that South University as a character zone, our D1 regulation is at 180 feet, but the South U actually limits it at 150. And a lot of folks just come forward and they're like, actually, I'd like a PUD anyways, and could I go a little higher, and could I try to use those premiums? So it's like it's kind of set the character for us, really kind of what the market is calling for, and what that kind of type 1A construction of steel concrete, the scale and the density that they're going to need to make their project profitable enough for it to be convincing to limited partner capital as well as debt. And so I think from that height, it's interesting because again, as we always talk about, zoning regulates, height, setback, FAR, permitted use. And so to a certain extent, I mean, I think it is helpful. It's kind of like the HOA argument, right? Like people say like, oh my gosh, HOA rules can be awful, but also it does kind of keep your neighbors also from acting in a completely unruly manner. So it does set some like, it's like there's good and bad. And so to that, this was done, without or not without, due process and thinking, behind it. And so, but we are seeing kind of the exceptional circumstances in which it's like, well, this definitely isn't working right now. So, yeah.
Kathleen,
ahead,
you
sorry.
came off mute for a moment. Did you?
I was
And then I had a
curious,
comment.
related to the PUD, process-wise, how much public input you typically get, or does most of it go once it goes to council? But do you guys at Planning Commission get a lot of feedback from the public?
I think so. It has probably nature to do. It has to do with the nature of the PUD itself, right? But I mean, if you're Domino's Pizza, apparently they're not happy about it at all. But no, yeah, we tend to do get feedback, but the PUD process is what it's just we get a pre-application. We go through like the normative kind of reviews, but then it goes to city council with our recommendation, and so. We'll get feedback, and again, I think I say at every meeting, it's really important to get that civic feedback and that civic engagement. But to answer your question succinctly, yeah, I think we get, yeah, and honestly, even if it's a by right project, like the apartment building that's coming up on Ann Arbor Saline, I don't know how many letters we got on that. So it just depends on the nature of the project, I would say.
yeah, and I think we get feedback when it crosses people's computers' eyesight. And sometimes that's at random places. Sometimes it's before, it's a pre-submittal thing. It's not even in front of us. And sometimes it's at city council and sometimes it's at us. It kind of just depends on where, who says, hey, everybody come on out for this thing. They're going to vote on, this board is going to vote on this thing, and people come out, and it may or may not be the kind of optimal time, but it's sort of where they are, meeting people where they are, I guess.
I think I wanted to come back to something Commissioner Lee said, and it's not a correction, it's a different view into it. I actually think 601 Mary Court is exactly what we should be talking about, because a lot of what the comp plan imagines is redevelopment. And here is a redevelopment that is increasing density, and they cannot. So our code right now, as it stands, says you cannot do this with the existing zoning because of these restrictions. And the more we focus on lot sizes, setbacks, and unit count, the more we're going to just replicate our existing UDC. We're not actually going to see significant changes to the UDC. Even it will have a better vision for the city because of the new comp plan. But until we actually look into the code and say, here is something we want. What are they at today? I don't know how many units they had today. I can't see that very quickly, and I don't remember, but they're proposing 42, and they were already in R4C, so they were either non-conforming or they were at 20 or just about 20 or so units. And
I think they had six per house.
So it was
currently.
4 houses previously, so
Yeah.
they were at 24. So then they were non-conforming in there, but not too far over, right? So 20% over. And then they come in and now they're double what the zoning wants. And this is exactly what you're telling us we have to do in order to make space for 35 to 40,000 people. We need to take existing properties and increase the density. And our response is, that's a nice idea, but our UDC does not permit it. So I would love to understand how what is the conversation here? What do you have for us? What should we do?
Well, and to extend that, I would like every lot to be able to be a court, like, to allow a Mary Court as it sits now, not even, as a fourplex, to allow 4 tiny little houses on a lot would be great.
And
That's not allowed because the front of the property is on the side. The front has to be
Exactly.
facing the street. So again, another thing that you couldn't take my 10,000 lot R1C and turn it into a court, because the fronts have to face Scioto Church, and here this would not be allowed, even if they came out to a sidewalk. So your point is very, very valid. And so that's why I'm really, really grateful that we're having this part of the conversation at this stage, because I hear you already telling us we have to rezone or densify our existing built environment. And the reality is we cannot with our current UDC.
And I think you're right, actually. In my head, this is because I think of this area as like C1AR, kind of like the campus zone or the campus business zone. But you are right. This is actually a fairly good example. Actually, this is a practical, a recent example of how somebody couldn't take it from 16 to 32 units. And so how can we make it an easier process, as opposed to, they've probably been working on this for several months now. And so, and a large part of also, I will revise my statement. I actually 100% agree with you in that respect. It's a good example of that. And and then I think with new development, as we try to bring properties up to like the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner standards on stormwater retention, I think we shouldn't also understate the benefits that come from having the city be more resilient from a stormwater retention standpoint, and being able to process, whether it's extreme winds or storms that we got over the weekend. But our ability to, for our city and sites to be able to retain the water and to make sure that we're not flooding our systems, etc. That's also going to be a continued helpful public benefit that comes from making this part of the development easier. So, so I'm with you on that. Yeah, lot size, setbacks, conflicting land use buffers, and density. So I think those are the items we're all kind of looking at for the UDC.
It really did seem to encapsulate a lot of problems all in one.
Yeah.
So it's
All right, are you gonna chime in, Stacy? I want to make sure if you are, or Kathleen or Jamie, like, tell us what to do, what's happening, what's gonna happen.
What's exciting is when you do a new comprehensive plan, the primary implementation tool is updating your zoning. So we had a pretty in-depth workshop a couple weeks ago with staff digging in on a variety of potential zoning solutions to this. And so I think we have examined your ordinance with all of this in mind, saying, okay, how can we simplify this? Where are the biggest obstacles? Where are the areas where it's not allowed by right? But I think the inverse is also hearing from you what's important to keep, and understanding what are the most important things in terms of context and things like that, so that when we create a future land use map that will then guide future rezoning, we can take all this into consideration and provide recommendations for a new ordinance.
Yep, I will second that. We are definitely thinking about this, and this is a great way of illustrating for us very specifically what's going on. So thank you for this conversation. I think this was very helpful. We have 5 minutes. Do we want to do just a quick wrap up? We can also just share what we have coming up next. And then any other overall questions or comments? Jamie, do you want to?
I think next steps would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation we're just having, I think this is exactly kind of where our next steps are leading, and that we're hearing these big picture things, but we really need to kind of get into the details and the nitty gritty of the aspects of the code and the things ultimately we're getting our recommendations. But, this is just our overall project schedule and kind of where we are. We've spent the past few months doing a lot of engagement. We're going to be doing some more focused conversations around some of these bigger picture topics. So we're going to be working to develop some focus groups, and then in tandem doing some more of this in-depth analysis and getting at recommendations, and then still striving to get a draft plan by the end of the year. So some of those conversations these are just some initial thoughts about focus groups. Thinking about natural features, sustainability, equity, affordability. We're calling the second group work sessions, but there might not be much difference between any of these conversations. They're really just kind of focused conversations, but want to have some more conversations with the Parks Department and open space, some more conversations around economic development and small business. From an engagement standpoint, we're going to be having a presence at Summerfest at the annex. We're trying to figure out some other additional pop-up or opportunities to pop up at existing events. And we're developing what we're calling a workshop in a box. It's basically like a lot of these activities that we're doing in these bigger events in a smaller format that we can kind of take to specific either neighborhood groups or other organizations and do some of that focused development or focused engagement. So that's kind of where we're going in our next steps.
So just a pedantic little note, Summerfest, unless it's something that I don't know about, does not exist here. That we have the Summer Festival, which is
okay.
and it's I mean, it's a
It's
different
not
name.
pedantic. I was looking up what Summerfest was too, and I was like, is this top of the park?
Yeah, I guess
Is
there's
this
Yeah.
the Ann Arbor
confusion on my end.
Summerfest?
Yeah,
It's the
on
Ann
top of
Arbor
the
Summer
park and
Festival.
Summerfest or what the difference is.
Milwaukee Concert Series is.
Okay.
So
I was
Well,
like,
we'll-
we're all a
Summerfest, I don't
little-
know what Summerfest is.
We'll make
Yeah,
sure
we're
we
all a
don't
little
end up in
confused.
Milwaukee trying to do some.
Oops.
But we'll get the name right.
All right. Well, I think that was a really good encapsulation for everybody watching. I really hope everyone's able to attend these. We need your voice at these.
Chair
and get your
Lee,
feedback.
I just had a quick question around the focus group, which I haven't seen in any of the documentation yet. Are we having any conversations around accessibility in these conversations? And what I mean for that, and it overlaps with what you're talking about in your work sessions around parks and open space, that it's not a lot of our parks and open spaces, because of where they sit in the city, are the infrastructure is managed by a different department. And so one department has the actual parks, but another department has the sidewalk, and another area has the transportation. And that to me is an accessibility conversation. So how does someone get to our Cascades, like for instance, right? There is a bus, but the bus drops them off 2.5 blocks or 3 blocks from the entry for delivery. There's a sidewalk, but the sidewalk ends. And then there's a park, but there is no connection along those ways, right? So like, is that in your scope or is that out of your scope? And who's having that conversation around accessibility?
The Parks Department recently did a very thorough, I believe it was wrapped up just last year, audit of accessibility for all of their services, and it included access to facilities and accessibility within parks. They are going to be taking the next steps to figure out what implications that has for capital infrastructure, but it is not immediately visible because they just did the audit and now they have to take that into a investment by the investment process. As far as how accessibility is incorporated here, the slide that was just up had equity, and my understanding from our conversation the other day, consultant team, was that we were building physical accessibility into the equity conversation.
Okay, I just want to raise it. I mean, I raised it at the planning table. I heard back from Parks and they were like, you're right, this is a gap. It's on our radar, but we haven't fixed it. And so but that is very local. So wanting to make sure that we're having that conversation citywide as well. And then where's the infrastructure? Are there infrastructure maps that we're going to see out of this comp plan or not?
I would
Whether
say
that's
yes, we will be looking at some of those as we work through the process, because I think way back when we first talked to you, we talked about, it's not just a matter of changing the zoning, it's also making sure that the infrastructure is in place or will be in place and is accounted for in order to handle this.
Yeah, because we won't be able to do the density because the infrastructure will prevent it. I mean, we've talked about upzoning parcels that come into the city, and something that was revelatory to me is like, oh yeah, we can upzone it, but the infrastructure that's there is not able to do this. And so then that actually is another thing that then prevents the goal that the city has for densification if the infrastructure isn't also there. And I just one more thing while we're here is it's like access to the internet. Like is our broadband conversations in this comp plan as well, so that when we talk about infrastructure, we're not just talking sewer or water, but we're talking access to the internet, because it's becoming a necessary utility for folks both to work at home, for kids to have access to educational resources. And so as we think about the city for 2050, we want to make sure we're building a city that everybody has the same access to, that we're not sort of building in the haves and the have-nots into our vision for what our city needs to look like. So,
Yes.
okay,
Yes,
great.
definitely. And yes, we have been, so early in the process, we did talk to a full range of city departments, and infrastructure was a big piece of that conversation. And so as we are working through some preliminary, ideas and scenarios, it will be necessary to revisit with those departments so that we're, in alignment as we work through the process. And as they're also thinking about in their departments, the infrastructure improvements that are, on the horizon for them.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think it was great to recap next steps. Mix Kelly, any final thoughts before we wrap this up? We're 3 minutes over right now, so.
I think continue to let Brett and myself know what you would like to understand about the process and the topics that are keeping you up at night and that you see repeatedly at the table. If there are examples that you see at the Planning Commission table that you would like explored in a future working session, please don't be shy to suggest those things, because the more specific we can, specific examples and topics that we can prepare our consultant team, the better conversations, the more you might get out of these sessions. So thanks for your engagement.
Great, thank you. And with that interface, Jamie and Stacey, any other kind of thoughts you had before we signed off for the night?
I don't think so. Yeah, thanks for the discussion. It was really helpful for our process, and yeah, excited to move forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to everybody here. And then with that, I'm going to move on to the last item on our agenda, which is adjournment. So with that, have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.